Minister?
On clause 4, it is, I am actually going to be tabling an amendment on behalf of the Crown. I will first read the amendment in. We will provide copies and then I will speak to it afterwards. Pardon me. Everything is going quite quickly here. All right, so I move in Committee of the Whole on Bill 15, Infrastructure Projects Act, to amend as follows. Clause 4, by adding the underlined text as shown, which I will just read the underlined text and provide the copy for members' view. So under section 4-2, we will add, okay, I'm going to read all. The section 4-2 will thus read, the Lieutenant Governor and Council may establish eligibility requirements for designation under subsection 1A, and then an additional section under that, 2.1, the Minister must not make a recommendation to designate an infrastructure project as a Category 2 project until eligibility requirements for designation under subsection 1B have been prescribed. I will sign 3 copies and provide for distribution.
Right then, about that recess. We'll give another 5 minutes for the amendment to be copied and circulated. So I have 6:07 on my watch, 6:08 now. So if everybody can be back at 6:13, please, in their seats. the whole on Bill number 15, Infrastructure Projects Act, back to order. We are on the amendment to Clause 4, recognizing the minister.
Thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity to table the amendment on behalf of the Crown. We take our obligations under the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act and Section 35 of the Constitution Act very seriously, as we do the responses that we have heard from First Nations leaders following tabling of Bill 15 and the questions that have been raised by the opposition. We are committed to engaging on the concerns that have been raised around the bill, particularly around questions regarding the designation of Category 2 projects as provincially significant. Over the last week or so, both the Premier and I have provided our assurances that no Category 2 project would be designated as provincially significant and therefore be able to access the streamlined permitting tools in Bill 15 without the consent of First Nations. To be clear, designating a Category 2 project as provincially significant does not provide approval for a project to proceed. All this being said, our intentions and assurances aside, we also accept that the current legislation as it reads today does not provide sufficient certainty to First Nations. As a result, the amendment I am introducing today would bind government by statute to have a regulation in place that defines the eligibility criteria for a Category 2 project before a project can be designated as provincially significant. As obliged by DRIPA and our Section 35 obligations, this regulation would be developed in consultation and cooperation with First Nations. The regulation would, like all regulations, be made public. This consultation process will also allow for broader engagement with other interested stakeholders, which is something the opposition has requested. I know that there are other questions on this bill, which I look forward to continuing debate on through committee stage. This particular amendment is about holding space and guaranteeing in statute that this space exists for us to work with First Nations, not only on what kind of projects could be considered for Category 2 designated as provincially significant, but also how this process will be operationalized. It is my hope that opposition members will support this amendment as it adds a binding element to government that does not currently exist in Bill 15 at this time.
Upon review, this amendment has been found to be in order. Speaking, recognizing the member from Prince George Mackenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And speaking to this amendment brought forward by the government for Clause 4, I would say that overall, one of the things that I have repeated in the course of this debate over and over again is the word arbitrary. I use the same word in our discussion in nearly 40 hours of debate on Bill 7. Because a lot of what we're talking about in the context of this bill has been quite arbitrary in nature, with power concentrated in the hands of Cabinet and really their ability to pick winners and losers. And in this case, we're for eligibility requirements for a designation for these projects, we still are looking at a scenario where the province, through the Cabinet, is giving themselves the power to make these regulations to decide who's in and who's out. First Nations have clearly stated their opposition, and this does not do what the government intends in terms of enough of what meets First Nations. The First Nations Leadership Council released another open letter only an hour ago saying, quote, "As you know, the honor of the Crown is at stake when the Crown engages with First Nations. As part of honorable dealing, it is essential and should go without saying that statements and explanations provided by provincial government representatives about proposed legislation need to be clear. Without clarity, First Nations are not able to assess the important import or impacts of the proposed legislation." End quote. Again, that was a joint letter by the First Nations Leadership Council. And when I look at the wording of this amendment, it's still not clear for anyone in this case. It's not clear for First Nations. It's not clear to the official opposition, and it's not clear to stakeholders across the province, including local governments. I've talked previously about UBCM and their context of the bill as well, and I'll quote again Councillor Trish Mandewo, President of UBCM, quote, "The provisions in Bill 15 constitute an unnecessary overreach by the province into local decision-making," end quote. So in this case, we have the province making eligibility requirements for a designation of these projects, but it's still completely arbitrary in Cabinet's hands. So it depends on who's lobbying, who's in and who's out, who's a friend of the government and who's not at this time. This is a serious overreach and does nothing to address the concerns of these rights holders and stakeholders in the province. And for the government to suggest, I'm sorry, that this is going to fix this clause of the bill, let alone the bill in its entirety, is simply not the case. And for that reason, we're going to be, myself and members of the official opposition will be opposing this amendment. And thank you for your time, Honourable Chair.
Recognizing the third-party House Leader on the amendment to Clause 4.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin with the foundational document for First Nations, Indigenous peoples, participation, involvement, influence over legislation. A document that I've referenced earlier this afternoon, but that was developed in consultation and in partnership with First Nations, interim guidelines, interim approach to implementing the requirements of Section 3 of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, prepared by the Declaration Act Secretariat, October 2022. I'm going to quote two parts from this document. The first, which I've mentioned earlier this afternoon, but I'm going to repeat this section because it's directly germane to this proposed amendment. And it comes directly from the United Nations Declaration, and the DRIPA Act directly brings the UN Declaration into consideration here. And it says, states shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the Indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free, prior, and informed consent before adopting and implementing legislative or administrative measures that may affect them. This amendment is a legislative measure. Later in the same document, some of these key phrases are interpreted. The phrase consultation and cooperation in the Declaration Act, that's the BC Act, is taken from the UN Declaration, and its meaning has been the subject of advice from the United Nations Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous People. Quote, use in the UN Declaration of the combined terms consult and cooperate denotes a right of Indigenous peoples to influence the outcome of decision-making processes affecting them, not a mere right to be involved in such processes. I would add there's been no involvement of First Nations in this amendment. They have, as far as I know, they haven't seen it or had a meaningful opportunity to comment on it, or merely to have their views heard. It also suggests the possibility for Indigenous peoples to make a different proposal or suggest a different model as an alternative to the one proposed by the government or other actor. So this is not consultation and cooperate doesn't mean here's what we propose, what do you think? It also means here's what we propose, take the time to consider it. If you have an alternative proposal, we will meaningfully and in good faith consider it. None of that has happened with this amendment. As such, the province must approach policy and legislation development that may affect Indigenous people in a manner that ensures Indigenous people are fully involved partners in the process and have opportunities to influence the outcome of matters that may affect them. So for that reason alone, the Green Caucus will not, I will not be, on behalf of the Green Caucus, be supporting this amendment. But the concerns go further, and that is that this is a small step. Even if First Nations had seen it and supported it, it's a small step towards clarifying what will be the eligibility, what will be the criteria for a Category 2 project. Last week, the minister, or the week before last week, the minister read into the record these types of criteria, but in order to be designated a provincially significant project, those projects would need to create significant economic, social, or environmental benefits for people in British Columbia. Factors that are currently under consideration include whether a project significantly contributes to public infrastructure, critical mineral supply, food or water security, human health, safety, energy security, post-disaster recovery, trade diversification, access to new markets, supply chain security, replacing U.S. imports, British Columbia's climate goals and housing. Basically, any project that I can think of would fit within one of those factors. So this is not a definition that provides any clarity. This is a definition that obfuscates what is a provincially significant project. And this amendment does nothing to reassure British Columbians about what a Category 2 project will be, whether First Nations or non-First Nations. And so this amendment, yes, we'll pass a regulation. We promise we'll put it in legislation, so it's better than Hansard, but it doesn't take us any closer to understanding what a Category 2 project will be. And for the Green Caucus, you know, we have enormous concerns that this regulation could lead to oil and bitumen pipelines, natural gas pipelines, fracking wells and infrastructure, refineries, coal transport, any number of projects that from our perspective we would not want to see as provincially significant projects. So on the one hand, the consultation and engagement requirements required by the government's own policy developed in partnership with First Nations is not met. From a policy perspective, position of the Green Caucus on this type of legislation, we take no comfort from this clause because we have no idea. We're no closer to knowing what this opaque provision around Category 2 projects is than we did before we saw this amendment. And so for those reasons, I return to our point made earlier this afternoon. You know, take the same approach as Bill 7. Pull this bill. Call it an exposure bill. You have the ability to do that. Take the time. Build the consensus. Don't build division. Build consensus around how we're going to approach. Have UBCM, First Nations, the government, and you know, standing on the same podium, supporting this, as opposed to this type of approach. And so we will not be supporting this amendment.
Recognizing the minister.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thank the members for their comments on the amendment. I will say it is, I want to acknowledge that the amendment itself is not, rather, I have no expectation that this amendment on its own will change anybody's mind on Bill 15 in either direction. However, I have also heard from members the desire to bind government to their promises. We promised that we would be consulting and engaging broadly on what the eligibility criteria around a Category 2 project would be before we designate those projects as such. However, we also acknowledge that the bill as it is written does not require that, could allow government to go ahead and designate a Category 2 project upon royal assent if we wanted to. What this legislation does, what this amendment does is prevent that from happening and hold government to its word that a regulation that would be made public, that would be transparent, that would be developed in consultation, cooperation with First Nations, because it is our obligation to do so, and that happen before any Category 2 projects are designated. So it holds government to that. It was not intended to somehow make the opposition change their mind on the bill. But I heard earlier, member referring to finding ways to constrain the authorities of the minister. This is a way to do so. That is why we have offered it.
Seeing no further discussion, shall the amendment to Clause 4 pass? Aye. Division has been called.
The chair asks if there is an agreement to waive time.
Aye.
Yeah. All right, before putting the question. Best part of the job. All right, now, before putting the question, I remind all members that only members of Section A or their duly appointed substitutes are authorized to vote. The question is on the amendment to Clause 4. Thank you. Those in favor, please rise or otherwise indicate. Thank you. Members, please be seated. Those voting nay, please rise or otherwise indicate. Thank you. You may be seated. Clerk?
Aurora, Routledge, Popham, and Green, 6. And those voting against, Boltby, Halford, Van Popta, Mock, Williams, and Botterill, 6.
Members, there being an equal number of votes for and against, the chair must make the casting vote. In accordance with recognized parliamentary customs, the chair votes against the amendment to keep the bill intact in its original form and as adopted at second reading. On Clause 4, shall Clause 4 pass?